You are tuned to Macro TV, and in today's episode, we are introducing the basic model of macroeconomics. This is Study Unit 2 and Chapter 2 in Fourie and Burger. Now, we're all familiar with the circular flow of economic activity, and the textbook shows this rather complicated version, but you'll see all the familiar parts. It's the households are there on the right-hand side. They're also the consumers and the owners of the factors of production. And on the left-hand side, we have the firms producing goods and services. Now, throughout this chapter and Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, we'll be looking at different elements of the circular flow and building a model that describes the working of the economy as a whole. In Chapter 2, we are focusing on the goods market. In 3, we'll add the financial sector. In 4, we'll add the foreign sector and end up with a model of the economy. Now, this is also shown on this slide, and the models that we're aiming to build to describe the working of the economy as a whole is the so-called ISLM-BP model in Chapters 3 and 4, and the ADAS model in Chapter 6. By way of introduction, what we are currently busy with is a simple Keynesian theory of how income is determined. The focus is on the goods sector, so we'll be looking at all the components of aggregate spending, the familiar C plus I plus G plus X minus M or Z. Now, we talk about the determination of the value of output and of income in the economy. And once we have that, we can start talking about the business cycle. We can talk about policies that influence the economy, recessions, unemployment, and all those. Now, in this basic framework, the Keynesian approach comes from the expenditure side of the economy. So the whole focus is on how expenditure determines production, how demand determines supply. Each level of production corresponds with a level of income. And this goes back to the idea of how do you determine the value of production in the economy. If you follow the value add approach, or the approach that you look at the payments made to the factors of production, then if you add labor and capital and natural resources and entrepreneurship to produce goods and services, the value of those goods and services equals the payments made to the factors of production. So those factor incomes, rent and interest and wages and profits, they match up to the value of production. The end result is that you have an income expenditure circular flow, and that's the heart of the Keynesian approach. Now, the circular flow is in a simplified version shown in figure 2.2 of the textbook, in which the households are the owners of the factors of production. They supply that to the firms and they receive income in return. They use that income to buy goods and services. So the goods and services that they produce flow back to them. It's consumed and to maximize utility. Now, in this framework, everything starts from the expenditure side. So, for example, if there is for some reason an increase in expenditure, and we'll get to those reasons when we start talking about shocks and policies, but let's just say there's an increase in expenditure. First off, stocks are depleted. So firms realize that they don't have enough stock, and when this is reduced, it's a signal to producers that tells them that we are producing less than is being demanded by the market. And producers then start to increase production. They employ more factors of production, and that means that incomes paid to these factors of production also increases. So this process continues where it starts off with an increase in expenditure, which leads to an increase in production, which leads to an increase in incomes. And the macroeconomy in this model is in equilibrium when the value of total income equals the value of production equals the value of the spending. Now, this can be illustrated graphically, and you'll see the graph there in the top right-hand corner. We've got expenditure on the vertical axis, and we're measuring income on the horizontal axis, and the 45-degree line just represents the line where expenditure is always equal to income. That's where equilibrium is in this economy. Now, the actual expenditure is represented by the expenditure line in blue there called aggregate expenditure. And in the rest of this chapter, we'll be looking at the components that make up aggregate expenditure. For the moment, though, it's enough to say that where the aggregate expenditure line crosses the 45-degree line, you've got equilibrium at the income level YO. You'll see that this aggregate expenditure line has a specific intercept on the vertical axis. It also has a positive slope, which means that if income increases, expenditure will increase. We'll talk more about the different components that creates this shape during the rest of the chapter. So to conclude, this is a quick introduction to the basic Keynesian model of the macroeconomy, and the whole perspective is that expenditure drives production. There is equilibrium in this economy when the values of income equals production equals spending.